Jesus! This is what I was afraid of. Tensions have been so high since we got to Jerusalem. I've been following him for 3 years, and I've never seen Jesus get wound up like this. He is the one who sat with the children and the sick and talked with outsiders. So able to stay centered in peace, and frankly, was beyond my understanding. But now he is so worked up, I'm afraid. That's it. I'm afraid in this moment that this is going to lead to trouble. Is this really the way to win over people in his cause? By causing a stir in the temple? Isn't the Romans and the corrupt Jewish leaders they have in their pocket that we should be targeting? But instead he's yelling at the people who are trying to help these pilgrims follow the laws of the temple. And yet I get it. I've been angry too. Not at the people who are trapped in the system, but at the system itself. The way things are, I'm so angry at the way things are. How will anything change? Only when we all look at our own part in it. Only when we see how we prop up the system because of our fear. And for those who benefit from it, because of our greed. Only when we search ourselves and cleanse the temple of our hearts, we will be able to change. We will be able to be the change we want to see. So I will stay by his side no matter where this leads.
How can we possibly understand Jesus' actions that day in the temple when we don't really understand what it is that upset him? You know, if we took a surface look at Jesus' actions that day, we would say to ourselves, oh, Jesus was really angry at the temple priests and the money changers. The temple must have been an awful place. You know, it must have been oppressing the poor. It was chummy with Rome. It excluded Gentiles and was fostering hate of foreigners. It imposed oppressive purity laws on the people. It had to have been a terrible, terrible place. But in her book that kind of goes with our series, Entering the Passion of Jesus, Amy Jill Levine points out that Jesus didn't hate the temple and he didn't reject it. In fact, he calls the temple my Father's house. And his followers continue to worship in the temple even after his death. Jesus tells the leper to go to the temple and to cleanse himself there. Here he doesn't say the temple was exploiting people. He doesn't accuse the money changers of dishonesty or overcharging. The temple actually was open to everyone, even Gentiles. So it was literally a house of prayer for all nations. Everyone was welcome. So if Jesus wasn't condemning the temple, if he's not protesting the treatment of the poor or the financial exploitation of the money changers or the purity laws that were imposed by the priests, what was he saying with his actions in the temple that day? Jesus wasn't concerned about the temple. He was concerned about the people who were coming to it. People were practicing cheap grace. They were taking God's mercy for granted, going about their lives as they so chose, doing whatever they wanted day in and day out, and then coming to the temple and offering their sacrifices without any intention of changing. Cheat, murder, steal, commit adultery, lie, and then come to the temple and offer sacrifice and leave to continue doing those things. They had no intention of following the will of God. That's what Jesus was objecting to. The attitude of the people as they came to that house of prayer. And there's the rub, isn't it? There's the ouch for us. Do we do the same thing? Do we live the bulk of our lives as we choose? Casually doing wrong or refrain from doing what's right on Monday through Saturday, and then come to this house of prayer, singing the hymns and maybe shaking a few hands, putting a couple dollars in the plate, only to leave and continue our lives as we choose, with no intention of following the way of Jesus. No intention of living our lives differently because we have encountered the Son of God. For Jesus, faith is supposed to do something in us. It's supposed to change us, to transform us, to affect the whole of who we are and the whole of how we live. The church is supposed to be a place where people promise to follow Jesus and then leave here and follow through on those promises. This Lent can be an opportunity for us to ask hard questions. Are we truly a place that welcomes all, a house of prayer for all nations? Or do we really only welcome those who look and act like us? How do you act in your day-to-day life? How do you treat others? Do you need to change anything to bring yourself, your life, and your actions into closer alignment with Christ? Are you transformed? Or is it business as usual when you leave here? Do you live, my will be done, or thy will be done? Have you forgiven? Resisted temptation, controlled your temper, loved your neighbor, loved your enemies? And if not, what is going to be different because you come to this house of prayer and encounter Christ? If we are not transformed by our faith, if we're not changed in some way by our encounter with Jesus, then we too are practicing cheap grace. We want Jesus without the cross. We want forgiveness without sacrifice. And this Lent can be a real opportunity for us to take a long, hard look at our lives and at our congregation and ask ourselves, what do we need to change so that we continue to live more and more and more like Christ? Amy Jill Levine says in her book that Jesus was upset because people had taken God's house of prayer and made it into a den or cave of thieves, a safe haven for sinners. And she says that that's what Jesus is objecting to, that the temple has become a safe haven for sinners. And that's where I have to disagree with her, because the church is a safe haven for sinners. It always has been. God always welcomes and claims us wherever we are, no matter how deep we may have gotten ourselves in the muck. But here's the good news. God doesn't want to leave us there. God doesn't want us to be content to live in the damp, dingy cold of the den of thieves. He doesn't want us to be content in living in the mud and the muck of our mistakes, of our self-centeredness and our regrets. God wants to welcome us into the light. The church is a safe haven for sinners. We will never reach perfection in our faith. We will never always be open. We will never always be welcoming or always loving. But we should be leaning into those things, striving to become better reflections of God's perfect grace and forgiveness and love. We all have thoughts and actions that we need to change. So I encourage you this week, I encourage you to take this opportunity to figure out what it is in your life that needs to change. What regrets do you need to let go? What parts of you need forgiveness? Where do you need to forgive? Figure out what is your part that needs to be changed. And what is our congregation's things? What do we need to change as a congregation? And then perhaps what we can do is this year we can make a real, intentional effort toward living more fully into the light of God. Amen.